Hello and welcome to the Gadd podcast, where we delve into the minds of entrepreneurs and top performers to discover how they got to their success and growth. Implement the strategies you learn in this podcast and start shaping your own growth and entrepreneurial journey. It can be that simple. Today, I'm joined by a friend of mine. We grew up in the same town, Mr. Matt Pelling.
Hello, hi Phil, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm very well. Thanks, Matt, for joining me today. So we're gonna chat with Matt about his story, from how he went from a small town in Sussex to being on stage with one of the musical legends, that is Stevie Wonder. That happened recently, but Matt, explain how you got to that point.
Wow, so yeah, that's the story that sort of spans 20 plus years, I guess. It started really from me just being a musician, not a particularly good musician either. I played in bands and whatnot from the age of about 16 as a drummer. Um, when I what happened? When I left university, I kind of moved away from where my band were, and I started to dabble in electronic music and using technology. And that led me down a certain avenue of the world of sampling, which was using any sound from anywhere with my little PC computer. And I thought it was just so amazing that I could record anything and make music with it. So that led me into a job for a company called Time and Space, which were the UK distributor of sampled sounds, sample CDs, CD-ROMs, which they were back then. And I worked there as a marketing guy, and I learned a little bit more about the industry. I was quite excited by it. And after a very successful year there, I left that company and decided to try and do it for myself. I'd always kind of ran small businesses, very small businesses, like a market stall or a car boot sale, that type of thing. I always wanted to try and earn my own money, thinking that if the right people came along today, I could make, £200 or something like that. It would be amazing, and there'd be no one telling me what to do. So I was always motivated to do things myself. My mum and dad were both shopkeepers, so I guess it was kind of in the blood. So in about '98, I started a small sample company, like a little bit like a record label, but for sounds rather than tracks. And these sounds would be sold in collections on CD, and would have themes like drum and bass, or house music, or electro, or funk, or whatever. And I managed to sell a few of those, made a few mistakes, and got the grounding for kind of what that business could be, but essentially failed at it, really, because I thought I'd made it too quickly and started relaxing when really it had only just begun.
Yeah.
To speed things up really a lot, and of course maybe we can go into the different details of it later, but
Well,
essentially,
actually, I just wanted to ask, what was the initial kind of idea that made you thought, okay, this could actually work? I mean, what gave you, what gave you sort of idea that that sort of product would be something people wanted?
well, it's actually a little bit of that's really going back to sort of 97, 98, but it's basically a little bit of a technical concept that I had where, and I don't want to sort of alienate the listeners here by getting too technical on the music production front, but I came up with a concept that essentially allowed the purchasers of my CDs the ability to listen to a drum loop, which is like a drum pattern played over 4 bars, but then take the sounds from a different kit, which I also had on my CD, and then switch them around. And that was quite flexible for the time. Obviously, not particularly flexible for what you can do now with computers.
Yeah.
I was really into that concept of not saying this loop is what you must use like this. Everyone's different, and I want to give you a collection of sounds that you can mix and match in a new way. And I suppose it was a very crude technical breakthrough.
Okay, cool. So you said that that initial kind of business failed. So What happened from that point? Well, how did you move forward?
Well, I think around that time, I decided to go traveling. To start that business, I'd managed to get a Princess Youth Business Trust loan of £4,000, and that was matched by an overdraft from the bank of £4,000. So it was 8,000 that I'd started off. Now, when I say failed, the company actually never stopped. It was Matt Pelling trading as beatnik samples back then.
Yeah.
I just kind of paused it basically, and I decided to go traveling because it was something that I'd wanted to do for a long time, which I know that you relate to.
Yeah, totally.
And so I went and I did that, and I went traveling for about 10 months, and probably 3 or 4 months before I came back, I started writing a little book of business ideas for when I got back, because I was aware that I was going to come back with no money, and I was either going to become an alcoholic or a depressed person or something if I didn't have some form of a plan.
Yeah.
And so I came up with a few different ideas, one of which I kind of stole from being in Australia, which was very much the Deliveroo concept, which was way before we had it over here.
Right. Yeah.
I had a second one, which I can't remember what it was, to be honest. It's probably in some book somewhere in my attic. And the third one was essentially to do what I'd done before, but just do it much better and do it properly this time. And whilst I enjoy eating food, I didn't really have a passion for the catering industry. So I thought, you know what, I think I'm going to really try and do this properly, because I had some really good reviews for the first iteration of what I was doing from various trade mags. And it really only failed due to my lack of application. So I thought, you know what, let's do it properly. Let's learn from the first time, and let's really make it work and put 110% into it this time.
Yeah, that's cool. And just actually going back to traveling, you know, I kind of did a similar thing. It's almost a good reset in a kind of way, isn't it?
I
You
think
just
so. Yeah,
you
it
just
was.
yeah, you just kind of yeah, for me it was anyway. So yeah, you came back, and you said you're going to do it properly this time. Let's unpack that a bit. How did that look? What were some of the things that you did? Do you think to create like? Well, actually, it's a question I wanted to go to later on, but you said you got sold by Beatport. Is that correct?
Got
Bought,
bought.
sorry, bought,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
And I found a statement from Rob McDaniels, the CEO there. And it said Matt Pelling and the entire Luke Masters team are world-class people who have built amazing products. So I just want to unpack that a little bit. You know, how do you go around? How do you go about, if you could literally like map it out? How do you build an amazing product?
So it really started very simply. I'm not a very complicated or particularly well-read or particularly educated person. I'm a kind of a proud, loyal, determined, somewhat competitive person, I would say.
Yeah.
And I had a really good friend and a guy called Paul Willard, and he and I started what became known as Loop Masters, the second iteration of this idea in early 2002. And we had a very simple motto, which was, apart from the fact that he knew I could only afford to pay him for a year, we said, look, we're going to do whatever we can to be proud of what we do here, because there's every risk that it's going to fail. And we don't want to look back in a year's time or in any point in the future and regret not having given 110%. If this doesn't work in a year, we'll move on with our lives, no regrets. But let's see where we can go. And 1 year turned into 2, turned into 4. And Paul, I'm glad to say, still works at Loop Masters today. So it was a very simple fundamental of really making the products as high quality as possible, like pricing them as competitively as we could, trying to work with artists rather than to do everything ourselves, which might have made more gross and net profit in the short term, but in the long term we wouldn't have had a diverse library of sounds, which we felt was really important to the future of the business. The other thing was that I didn't even start working full time in the company on the second time round until nearly a year in, because making the products, which is what Paul did, was more important than me selling the products and marketing the company. Until we had enough products, what was the point of me being involved? So I actually, apart from being the shipping clerk and setting up a few distribution deals, I was actually taking the pressure off of the company by working actually for our good friend Tim Dawson in another role completely, which thankfully he was very flexible with me about. So yeah, I mean, it was very simple, humble beginnings. It was creating relationships with people who we understood. Musicians tend to get ripped off. They tend to have low trust after that happens. And we made sure that we were very accountable to them in terms of literally our accounts and statements. We would tell them what's going on. We would communicate with them, and they built a trust with us, which I think has stood the test of time very well. And so really it's a very basic fundamentals of how we got started.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think every startup goes through that phase. And one thing you mentioned there, also relationships. I think that's just one of the foundations in every single business, you know, especially, well, not especially, I think in most industries. But yeah, like, you know, myself, when, you know, we started a restaurant, well, bakery business here in Canada, and yeah, you just put everything into it, don't you, for the first, or however long it takes to make it successful. You just, you know, do what it takes. I think, you know, just, you know, you don't pay yourself until you can and stuff like that, and it pays dividends for sure. So, you know, one other thing Rob mentioned was like a team of world-class people. So how what's your approach to teams and culture in a business?
Well, we grew to about 50 people by the time I sold it to Beatport in late 2021. 21? Yeah. 20, sorry, late December 20.
Yeah.
And it was very organic, to be honest, for us. I mean, you know, it was almost a family business at one point. My mum helped with some of the accounts, my auntie also with accounts and customer service. My dad, who's actually separated from my mum for many years, ended up also working too in a bit of SEO and copyright protection and stuff like that. Paul's sister Natalie came on as label manager. My mum's new partner's granddaughter Danielle came on in accounts. You know, it was very there was nepotism happening left, right, and center. Has to be said. And then when I moved over to Brighton, or I was in Brighton, but when we sort of started an office in Brighton, that's probably when we started recruiting a bit more locally. We got involved with some of the local colleges and so forth, doing some work experience. And, you know, 1 out of 5 or 6 people that would come through would shine. In fact, one of them, a guy called Gareth Halsall, ended up being a bit of a superstar, and he's now, in fact, taken over my job since I retired last week. So he literally started as an intern, earning 0.
Yeah.
And, you know, now he's doing very well for himself. So pretty organic. I mean, I must say, since we joined Beatport, it's been made clearer to me the policies that perhaps bigger companies need to take in order to be a more balanced workforce, a more diverse workforce. And I do appreciate all of those things. It just so happens that where I come from in the south of the UK, Eastbourne and Brighton, and the industry being music production, there is just at this point in time a bit more of a bias towards the white male, basically. Although, you know, that is changing, and it's a good thing that it is over time. There's now some fantastic women and people of all backgrounds in the industry. But, you know, my company we drew from the resources around us and from friends of friends, and HR was never really my strong point from one sense. But when you look at the retention of staff that we had at Loopmasters, you could say I was a genius at it. But if you looked at the the details of our processes, you would say I'm an absolute amateur.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I've got this memory, and I don't know where it is, and I don't know where we were, but you were there, and we were talking about business, and I just remember you just, it was a few years ago now, and you just rattled off your numbers, like just, and I just remember thinking, I was just thinking I'd started for the first time ever, like using a business coach myself, and I just thought, wow, that's someone who really understands his business. So I was going to sort of say, how did you go? How did Loop Masters get to a point where someone like Beatport considered it a good purchase?
Yeah, good question. So from those sort of humble beginnings in the early 2000s, we sort of grew organically as a label, and we then invested quite a lot for us at that time, around about 2007 or 8, in a website that allowed us to do digital distribution as well. We moved from making CDs into putting everything as digital downloads, which obviously seems very obvious to everyone now, but back
Yeah.
then it was almost considered a bit risky. But we went that way, and we became a distributor for another 40 or 50 brands, and loopmasters.com became probably from about 2009 to 2015 sort of the number one resource and one of the best known brands for buying royalty free samples sort of worldwide. So that gave us quite a lot of leverage, and it was still very organic, and everything was in house and bootstrapped, by me. In 2000, I had another idea, and this is the other big accelerator, was that I had an idea. So as well as sounds, a music producer also tends to use plugins, which are all types of everything you would imagine in a real music studio. So equalizers, effects, synthesizers,
Right.
mixing boards, everything in it that anyone would imagine in a real studio is now modeled in software, right? And it's collectively called plugins. So
Right.
I noticed that there was no independent marketplace for music plugins. It was independent individual companies marketing to customers directly, and there were a few very big ones that did it well, and there were lots of other fantastic products out there that were really underrepresented because they weren't very good at marketing, but they were very good at making products.
Right.
So we invested in, because what we did have was an amazing tech team. I'd been really lucky to meet a couple of guys in Poland who ended up being, friends for this whole period. And we ended up having a tech team of 10 in Poland as of today. So we invested in a plugin boutique marketplace, Plugin Boutique being the name of the company.
Right. Yeah.
And, that took about 3 years, 4 years. After 4 years, my accountant told me to shut it down. He said, "You're 450,000 in debt to Loop Masters, and you've got to let it go, Matt," sort of thing. You've got to know when it's a failure. And I said, "Give me one more year." And the next year, we fortunately turned a £32,000 profit. I think the year after was 150.
Right.
And then let's just say things went exponential for the next 5 years after that, until it was, doing serious digits every month.
Right.
And the combination of those two businesses with another platform that I created, a piece of software called Loop Cloud, which is essentially the old Loop Masters business moved into the cloud with a subscription service and a software application.
Right.
Again, don't want to get too techie for the non-music musos out there.
Yeah.
Built a SaaS platform essentially for samples. The combination of all of those things with the IP of all of the sounds that we had in our library created an opportunity to sell, and an opportunity for Beatport to really represent the music producer and not just the DJ.
No, that's cool. So, what was do you think the biggest thing that literally turned it around from like a 450,000 deficit to just like exponentially? Is it just the growth of what it was doing and the way technology was going?
I think when we first started it, we just thought, look, we've got all of these customers already.
Right.
in Loop Masters, and they
Yeah.
all use plugins. So why don't we just build a plugin marketplace, and they'll all just go there?
Okay.
And I think this is a common thing with when you have some success in business, is that you think it's very easy to replicate it somewhere else, even if it seems very closely related.
Yeah.
And I've seen that fail many times, and obviously I was nearly guilty of it myself. Um, I think what we underestimated was the suppliers were completely different. And in the sampling business, we were dealing often with musicians, one or two people, small companies, whereas in the software side of the industry, there were much bigger hierarchical structures, and there were companies that had been dealing direct and didn't necessarily want to deal with us. They still had the vision that they were going to get all of the money directly without having to split it out with any other parties. And it took 4 or 5 years for us to really demonstrate some success and get that sort of balance between supply and demand really ticking over and moving forward. So I guess that was the thing. It was the suppliers and our lack of understanding of the nuances of the market.
Cool. So you mentioned you retired yesterday, which is well, congratulations.
Last week, yeah, it doesn't feel
Last
like
week.
it, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I mean, obviously, I don't think you're the sort of person to, pitch up a hammock somewhere on a secluded beach and just drink pina coladas all day. What's next? And yeah, well, how did we get to being on stage with the legend Stevie Wonder?
Right, yeah. So last week I officially retired from Loop Masters and Plugin Boutique after a year and a half of working for Beatport. But being a sort of naturally interested entrepreneurial type of person, obviously I can never stop looking for different opportunities. And a few years ago, a very bizarre opportunity came along, which I still have trouble believing even happened. But trying to give you a very quick summary of that story is I don't know if you're aware of what a Rhodes piano is. Have you heard of a Rhodes piano?
Do you know what? I hadn't until the other day. So obviously, I went to Google and Wikipedia,
Right, okay.
and yeah, it's pretty cool, man. Like some of the musicians who've used this instrument, it's been like fascinating. Yeah. So
For sure.
give us a quick history on how this all came about.
Yeah, so I'll try and be as quick as possible. So a guy called Harold Rhodes in the 1940s, at the end of the war, he was an airman, but he was also an inventor and he was into music. He invented a thing called a time piano. So it's essentially the first electric piano. So if you think about a guitar and an electric guitar, the difference is, as far as I understand it, is that an electric guitar has pickups which pick up and essentially have little microphones which amplify the sound. And that makes it an electric guitar rather than acoustic. And he basically replicated that concept on a piano. And the concept was that the recovering military airmen who were recovering from the Second World War would have some form of music therapy with this tiny piano that they could have on their hospital bed. Anyway, so that was a great invention and the sort of start of the Rhodes piano and the first ever electric piano that existed. He then refined and developed that. In fact, a guy called Leo Fender of Fender Guitars, who was more of a businessman than him, managed to persuade him to license the name. And between them, they started manufacturing the Fender Rhodes piano, which in the 70s was very popular. And you had all sorts of famous bands using it. I mean, Miles Davis would insist that his pianists would not use a real piano, but would use an electric piano.
Right.
Excuse me. Anyway, it was very iconic, particularly in the 70s and 80s, mainly in the 70s for jazz, funk, soul. The Doors used it.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Stevie Wonder absolutely adored it, and there's part of the connection.
Right.
So what am I to do with this? I suppose would be a very good question. And I shouldn't really have anything to do with it, is the answer. I can't play the keyboards. I play drums.
Right.
But a while ago, I was contacted by the trademark owner, since Harold Rhodes died in the 90s.
Yeah.
And Rhodes became, apart from one small attempt to bring the piano back in the early 2000s, had been very much dormant. But the brand Rhodes is a very famous name in music.
Yeah.
And anyway, I was actually approached regarding a copyright issue quite a few years ago, about 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Years ago, which I sort of almost ignored at the time. The guy who owned the trademark said, you know, there's a potential small offence here, but I'm going to give you a license. And I said, great, thanks very much. Didn't really think about it again. And a few years later, he contacted me again to sort of explain that I'd sort of breached the conditions yet again, probably again without knowing it. Right. And I felt really bad about it because the Rhodes piano sound is something which you hear in so many types of music that I love.
Yeah.
You know, funk, soul, hip hop, drum and bass, ambient. I mean, it's literally everywhere. You will have heard it almost every day of your life without knowing. So anyway, I was very compliant with him, let's say. And long story short, for some bizarre reason, he actually offered me the opportunity to take over the trademark at the end of our months of negotiations. So again, long story short, it seemed like the most bizarre thing, but I managed to contact some really passionate people who really showed me that there is an opportunity there. And we're sort of nearly 3 years into building the new electric Mark 8 piano, which we excuse me, which we showed at the NAMM show, which is a music show in LA this last month. And Stevie Wonder was there, and it was amazing. He came, sat down, played the piano and sang, and it really just made our day. It was amazing.
Yeah. How old is he now?
I believe, is in his mid-70s now.
Oh, okay. A bit younger than I thought. I thought he was a bit older, but yeah, no, that's cool. That's such an icon to be, getting involved with your brand. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really something else. I mean, it was a very special moment.
Cool. So what else? What else is for you for the next? What's the next adventure? What's the next? What are you going to be up to next?
Well, Rhodes is something that will be something for the next few years for sure.
Yeah.
Then I'm quite into NFTs, so I've got a little NFT project on the go with a friend of mine.
Oh yeah.
Connecting art and music, and sort of focusing a bit more on the music industry side of things. So that's called deadbeatsociety.io if anyone wants to check it out.
Okay, yeah.
Genesis project coming out at some point soon, hoping that will lead into an interesting decentralized community-backed sort of artist showcase type project. So we'll see how that goes.
Cool.
I've got, what else am I into? I'm trying not to get into anything too much at the moment. I've got a 12-week-old daughter and a 2-year-old son.
Nice.
So after 20 years of building up Loop Masters, I'm trying to chill out a little bit for a year or so. But
nice.
There's a few investments that I'm involved with, mainly on the music side. So music related stuff is basically what I'm generally into. Cool.
So what do you do to not stress yourself out about work?
Well, generally I like sports, so I'm a keen squash player.
Oh yeah, cool.
Got a little sports centre just down the road. I've been playing squash for about 20 years. Tennis, squash, if I can, swimming, bit of cycling. I know you're a keen mountain biker. I've got my bike ready to be fixed up actually, because the South Downs are just round the corner, and I've been a bit busy, but not probably as much as you've been doing recently.
Yeah, and that's a big passion of mine. I love the biking. I'm fortunate enough to live in, I think what has become a bit of a a mountain biking mecca. So most days, pretty much every day I'm out on my bike. So yeah, no, it's cool. I live in a great part of the world for that, which you should come over and check out, because it's Our good friend Jamie actually is coming over in a few weeks. So
Is he? Yeah, I
yeah,
contacted him today. I'd love to check out that part of the world. It's been on my list for a while. So
it's beautiful, mate. Yeah, more than welcome if you ever fancy a little family visit. Definitely. Well, Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate, to catch up with you again and hear your story, and some real insight into how to build amazing products and, with a really, world-class team. So thanks again for your time, and I wish you all the best of luck with everything else that you're going to do in the future.
my pleasure. Thanks very much, Phil. Really enjoyed chatting to you and look forward to hearing from you again soon.
Yeah, nice one, mate. All right, take care.
Cheers then.